Welcome to the Indicator podcast, where we talk to people working to make evaluation systems stronger. This season, we're looking at evaluation officers themselves, not what they find, but how the officers that produce them are built, resourced, and run. My guest is Geeta Batra, Director of the Independent Evaluation Office of the Global Environmental Facility, and someone who spent her career moving between the private sector, development finance, and institutional evaluation. At the World Bank's Private Sector Department, the IFC, the World Bank's Independent Evaluation Group, and for the last decade at the GEF Independent Evaluation Office, where she served originally as Chief Evaluator and Deputy Director before becoming Director in 2024. Welcome, Geeta.
Thanks, Dugan. Nice to be here.
So the GEF IEO is one of the few evaluation offices in the world that sits at that very complicated intersection of environmental science, development finance, and multilateral politics. So today I'm looking forward to hearing more from you about how that works on the inside. You came into evaluation from an unusual direction. You had a PhD in economics, you did time at American Express, then you worked at the World Bank's Private Sector Department, implementing competitiveness projects in East Asia and Latin America, and then you moved to evaluation at the IFC. Many people arrive at this space through evaluation itself, but what did coming through a different door give you as an evaluator that a conventional evaluation career might not have offered?
Thanks, Dugan. I actually didn't plan to end up in evaluation. I started
No
in
one does.
economics. I spent some time in risk management at American Express. I moved to the World Bank operations and to IFC and results, right? So I came into evaluation actually after being on the implementation side for quite a bit. I had done projects in Latin America, the Caribbean, Eastern Europe, etc. And I think that experience actually shaped me quite a bit. You know, when you've worked a lot with governments, you've worked with private sector, you've worked with project teams, you become aware of how complex this development business actually is, right? Things rarely unfold as you plan. It's a tough business. Political priorities shift, institutions are changing, people are changing in ministries, and you realize that incentives matter a lot. So when I moved into evaluation, I never saw it simply as assessing performance or being like an auditor of results, right? Or checking whether indicators were actually met. I was much more interested in understanding how change actually happens through an evaluation cycle, why some interventions gain traction and why some don't, even when they both might look equally strong on paper, right? So that operational grounding also made me a little more, attentive to implementation realities. So you can be rigorous in your evaluation, but you also have to be cognizant of the complexity that practitioners face.
Right. When you were at the IFC, the evaluation function you worked in there was an interesting setup. It was kind of small, dispersed, spread across a bigger institution, and looking at interventions that are hard to evaluate. Working there, what did you learn more? I mean, I get what you're saying about understanding the complexity of implementation, but what did you understand about how evaluation is done well from your IFC advisory services work?
You know, Dugan, the IFC advisory portfolio was actually quite fascinating, and it was a fascinating challenge because it was very different from evaluating large infrastructure or, investment projects, right?
Right.
These were often, smaller interventions. You're focusing on policy reform, you're focusing on business environment work, which are spread across so many countries and sectors. And it's important to highlight that I was setting up an internal evaluation unit for advisory services from scratch. IFC had never had one. And this was not an independent evaluation, that has a formal mandate for evaluation, right?
Right.
So we were essentially building the function from scratch. And in some ways, that is actually much harder when you don't have that mandate of independent evaluation. In an independent office, there's already that it's an accepted expectation, right? That evaluation will happen. In an operational unit, you first have to demonstrate why is evaluation even useful at all.
At all, right.
At all.
Why are we even
right?
doing this?
Yeah. And that can be really difficult because you're often evaluating the work of your colleagues and the peers you're working with every day. So a major part of that work was actually first building trust and credibility, right? You're showing you're showing people, you're showing your colleagues, you're showing teams that evaluation was not simply there to point out what they were doing wrong, right? But you're actually
Which everyone
here
loves to hear.
Yeah, but actually you're helping them enhance their project performance. You're helping them lead their projects to better outcomes. That's what you're doing. But to convince them that you're doing that is not easy. So the portfolio itself also pushed us, on the methods front, right? Because the results were often long-term. They're indirect. You cannot point to a single investment and say, hey, there's the outcome, right? And for people who are used to numbers, what's the investment return? This was kind of a fuzzy space, right? So you try and give them as many concrete indicators like jobs created, policies changed.
Right. So it's hell of a quantitative, and you can really let the data make the point, hopefully.
Right. But you're also then forced to think about, how do I convince these people about contribution, not necessarily attribution? How do you get them to think about, institutional change, behavioral change, right? So what I learned very early on, and this is my first foray into results measurement and evaluation. Okay. I had never been in this field before. But what I learned is evaluation, the function is valuable only if it's useful to people. And that means relevance. It means credible. It means good timing. All right. You need technical rigor. I'm not saying you don't need technical rigor. You need that definitely. But you also need to understand that what decisions are the teams, wanting to take, right? And you want to provide the evidence at a time when they're still making the decisions, so that, you're feeding in at the right time, right? Now, one big advantage of actually being embedded in the institution and not independently from the outside is that when teams see your value, we crave for feedback loops, right? How is it improving learning, etc. Those feedback loops actually can be a lot shorter, right? Because you've done
especially if you're kind of at the desk next door, then you just walk over and have a conversation. It doesn't have to be a big structured engagement process.
So you work jointly with people. You look to modify programs. You look to rethink approaches with them. You can improve.
It's a very different dynamic, right?
Very different dynamic, right? And that's what we really did. It is a little more stressful without the authority of an independent mandate. But I think we really could, steer the institution towards programs that actually were more promising than others.
I guess you definitely lose something when you're not independent, but you also definitely gain something. You kind of gain a relationship, and you lose the authority, I guess, in some ways. But now you're in a different place. You're at the GEF IEO, formerly independent from the GEF Secretariat, but all within the World Bank's charming embrace. That's a complicated position because you're accountable to the Jeff Council. You're kind of within the World Bank ecosystem, and you're expected to hold the Jeff partnership accountable while being part of it. How does that work for you as the director of the evaluation office? That must be difficult.
So, I don't know how much you know about the Jeff Dugan, but it's actually quite an unusual institutional arrangement because it's not a single organization like the World Bank or EBRD or a UN agency, right?
I saw it
You know,
referred to as a family of funds.
that's one aspect, but it's also a partnership. It's a partnership of countries, civil society, agencies, conventions, the council, all of these entities operating together, right? That's the partnership. And that's the complexity as well. And the IEO, the Independent Evaluation Office, we sit within this broader ecosystem while also being institutionally independent of the agencies, institutionally independent of management, and institutionally independent of the secretariat. So where does our independence come from? It comes from the fact that we report directly to the Jeff Council. We get our budget, our work program, all that is approved by the Jeff Council, right? And that's a very, very important safeguard. In fact, we've just strengthened our evaluation policy along these dimensions of independence so that regardless who comes in as a CEO, et cetera, realizes that the IEO is completely functionally, budgetally, financially independent. Now, what's also quite distinctive in this, in the Jeff, is the council takes evaluation very, very seriously. And I haven't seen this in my experience until I came to the Jeff. It places a great deal of trust in the IU. We're like their eyes and ears on the ground, right? So evaluation in the Jeff is not treated like a peripheral exercise. Every council meeting has dedicated discussions to evaluation on the agenda.
So,
And
Geeta, can I just
replenishment.
ask a basic question? When you
Yeah.
say the council, is it the whole council or is it a council subcommittee?
No, it's the entire council.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, the Jeff does not have like a Cody in the World Bank or in
Okay.
other.
Okay.
It's the entire council, right? And that's the interesting part. So the whole council listens to evaluation findings, our recommendations, and then it kind of guides management, guides the agencies on what actions should be taken and how they should be responding to the recommendations, right? The other thing is replenishment discussions, and we're just going through.
Okay, I'm going to want to ask you about OPS 8. So let's come back to that.
Yeah, but I wanted to say that even in these replenishment discussions, 5 to 6 hours were just spent on our report, right? The replenishment discussion
How
starts with.
satisfying for you, hey?
Exactly. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's so rewarding working here, right? In the Jeff.
Right.
And of course,
Yeah.
that we all have the formal accountability mechanisms, right? Whether it was IEG in the bank or others, we have the management action record, which you report on in a more formal accountability sense of the word. How is management actually implementing the recommendations you came up with? So there's this continuous feedback, right? Between, our recommendations, what management does, oversight by the council. But at the same time, it's not just the council. We have to stay engaged with the rest of the partnership, right? Because at the end of the day, we depend on our agencies for data. We work closely with client countries.
So when you say the partners, you mean the implementing partners, not the donor partners?
Implementing partners in the country, like the operational focal points, the political focal points of the Jeff. We have dialogue with countries. Sometimes country staff accompany us on evaluation missions if they want to learn how we assess. So we have a little bit of that, capacity building, so to speak, if people are interested. And I really feel all this works because there's a of course, the mandate, but there's also a high level of professional trust in the IEO. And it's been built over the last 25 years.
So you became the director of the IEO in 24 after 9 long years as deputy director. So you know that place inside out. But this is a cheeky question. When you took over, what was the one thing about how the IEO was operating that you most wanted to change?
That's a tough one because, I've done a significant part of my career in the World Bank, and then I had spent a good amount of time also in the office, right? So I came into the role with quite an understanding of both the office
What
and the
was
broader
what?
institutional context, right? I also knew where we were beginning to reach our limits, knowing the office. So what I wanted to strengthen most was our ability to generate, I think, more strategic and forward-looking evidence, right? Not just excellent
Interesting.
individual evaluations, but what does all this mean together? Stronger
Taken
synthesis.
together.
Yeah, stitching things together.
Uh,
And
uh,
some early signals of where was the Jeff actually most transformative and where was it struggling the most. And that you can only get by stitching across different evaluations, right? To get a consistent message.
right.
So recognize that the Jeff is in a very interconnected space, right? You've got climate change, you've got biodiversity, land degradation, chemicals, international waters. And so the important questions to ask are not in these separate spaces. It's in the space that intersects all these areas. And in the broader sense, that intersects between environment as well as socioeconomic domains as well. So your evaluations, this whole, people talk about a systems approach, but the system is really an intersection of all these different variables, the environmental ones on the one side, the socioeconomic on the other, the trade-offs across different environment domains and those with the socioeconomic, etc. So that actually required us revisiting our approaches, modernizing our thinking, investing a little more in our methodologies, right? And for example, now, the Jeff has progressed towards more integrated and impact programs to address sort of the drivers of environmental degradation, right? Because there's a connection across all these different environmental areas. And the hope is to still be transformative. So we are engaging in a lot of thinking around what methodologies would work best to address transformational change. How do you measure this stuff? So that's where investing a lot. The other area is traditionally, it's been a grant institution, right? The Jeff gives grants to countries, but in this space today, it's a challenge to just get public funding. We all are aware. So another big area of focus is private sector, right? How should the Jeff be leveraging blended finance instruments and the private sector better? But that means we need to keep up too. We've got to understand this space. We've got to understand what difference do coral reef bonds make in the Caribbean and Pacific islands. We've got to understand.
Yeah, it's kind of being able to talk about things like additionality and with a hard data edge, right?
Exactly.
And really prove that you're changing the system. Geeta, I want to talk, each of these episodes, people have talked about a particular document, and I didn't ask you to bring something because I wanted to talk about something with you, which is your OPS 8 evaluation. Now, these are big deals, right? This is an 8th comprehensive evaluation of the Jeff, and it's timed, as you said earlier, to feed into the 9th replenishment. And these have just taken place in April, and the final council approval happens in June, I think, right? And I was looking at the document before the call, that the evaluations seem designed very explicitly to inform those negotiations, which is really, I think, important and a good call on your part. Do you honestly, in your soul and heart, feel like the evaluative evidence that you present there does influence the replenishment process? And what do you think lands best and leads to some or other kind of shift, and what just gets noted and everything proceeds? Sorry, that was a lot of questions.
Dugan, investing the time and effort into OPS8 was so worth it. And the reason being, but like I said, we have to be timely. And so we had to get a lot done for the first replenishment discussions in 2020, in last year in March. I mean, this is a year and a half long process. So we fed early
Oh, I didn't
findings.
realize that. That's a
Yeah,
long exercise.
yeah, it's a long road. And then we came in with the full report in October, and then finalization. I will tell you that we don't want to overburden the report with too many recommendations, right? The operational
Yeah, I looked at the recommendations.
Yeah, we keep the operational ones to the different evaluations that we give the council.
Exactly.
These are
Yeah.
meant to be strategic. These are meant to be big picture. And I'll give you an example. There was a cap on blended finance to about 15 million. And then you look at the broader picture and you say, Jeff clearly wants to go in the direction of getting more private finance. Restricting this to 15 million is not the way you're going to achieve it. Boom, instantly recommendation adopted, right? Another
But is
big
it now approving projects that exceed that cap? That's the question.
Yes. So they've already got a couple with IFC going. So the point is, the second one is, Jeff was moving a lot towards integration and very quickly spawned a number of programs. And yes, integration seems to be working. Early evidence is encouraging. But we thought it's time to also consolidate and take stock of what has been accomplished, as opposed to spawning new programs, because these are huge, they're complex. We said selectivity should be exercised. Done. They've reduced the number of programs, consolidated, really thought through it. So my point is that sometimes it's not all about, you're not looking at pie in the sky type recs. It's very doable, but we think this will make a big difference. And we've got the evidence to support that it will. So these are just some examples I'm giving you of.
No, they're very, very helpful. They're exactly what I'm looking for. What I find interesting about them is that they seem very practical and doable. Do you know what I mean? So one of the things I want to talk about is the kind of context in which you're working at the moment. Because it's very difficult for you as an evaluation head to be saying critical things about the Jeff program, because you may impact on donor support for those programs, right? How do you manage that dynamic? What's the kind of how do you hold the line? Are you just like, I have to speak truth to power, or how does that play for you?
So I think this is a tricky question, but I tell you, it's you have to build trust and credibility in your function for people to listen to you and for people to use your work, right? So engagement throughout the evaluation process, whether it's with the agencies, the secretariat, it's not about it. It's you draw a line on behavioral independence. Behavioral independence is, once I have the findings, I've engaged with you through the process. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to say, so this is what all this means when you pull it together in a report. After you've done that, sit again with the teams and say, have I got it right? Because they're the ones who are implementing. You're more sitting, as a spectator sort of and saying, let me look at this
This is
from
what
a
I
big
see.
I'm not in the weeds. I can tell you what's working or not. And sometimes they say, wow, this was really valuable because we never saw it this way. So you're also giving a different lens and a different perspective to them. So I think, as long as you have based it on evidence, you show a clear link between your conclusions, the evidence, and your recommendations, I haven't seen an issue on that. Sometimes people get a little defensive, but we're doing this already. Haven't we heard this in
Right,
evaluation?
right.
Why are you
Of
telling
course.
us
I mean, I think
we're
you made
doing
the
this?
point, right? It's about when people trust you. And so, whatever you're coming with, they're going to take it from somebody with whom they have a relationship and a sense of respect. I want to focus quickly on your products. So the IEO has a wide range of products, project and program evaluations to focal area studies to this big OPS. And it sounds like you're also going to be doing some interesting stuff on nature-based solutions. And I know, with the Footprint crew, there's conversation about coupled systems and trying to take this forward into an evaluative sensibility. But you only have so much money and so many people. How do you decide on what to prioritize within the IEO? And how do you balance the competing demands on your time and budget?
So this is a very good and weighty question, right? Weighted, because prioritization is always difficult, like you said. Resources are limited and demands are infinite. But I want to say that the Jeff has allocated quite a good amount of resources to the evaluation function. I have never felt in these, ever since I've been here, that we've been short of funds, right? To do what we want to do
Nice.
and what we need to do.
Very nice.
So I'm thankful, and even now during these difficult times, they have recognized the value of that OPS 8 brought to them, how they have used it, with their countries, etc., to make the case for the Jeff or whatever. Now, what we do is, in deciding our work program, we typically ask a few questions. Where is Jeff making the strategic investments? All right. Where are there important unanswered questions? Where could independent evidence materially improve programming and policy directions in the next 4 years?
Such a great question. Yeah.
Right, in the next 4 years. We're also trying to balance in our product mix accountability with learning. There's so many countries we've come across. We're trying to use a little bit of technology, story maps to say, and we're presenting the first one at the assembly in Uzbekistan, combining geospatial with stories. And then some evaluations are focused more on the retrospective to say what has worked well, and then some more forward-looking. And increasingly, we're trying to incorporate forward-looking into all our evaluations, because the Jeff wants to know, so what do we fund next? And that funding next comes very quickly in the next 4 years, right? So there's not that much time. So we've got to be a little more adaptive and include that. And increasingly, coming back to your other point about, systems and footprint, we're increasingly asking cross-cutting questions. Systems transformation, resilience, policy coherence, socioeconomic co-benefits that
Equity, equality. Yeah.
Exactly.
Justice.
So these are the issues with which our countries are grappling with the environmental conventions are grappling with. So the idea is, how much light can we shed light on these? So we kind of talk to people in the partnership. We talk to the secretariat, the countries, what would be most valuable to you. And we present a 4-year work program, and they comment and they say, could you please move this up? We really want to know this sooner rather than later. And so we adapt as we go along that 4-year work program and budget.
Yeah, look, I mean, I want to talk with you more about this, but we're going to wrap up the interview. We're nearly out of time. It's been so interesting. I've really enjoyed chatting. My last question if a Jeff Council member listens to this interview, someone who votes on your budget and receives your reports, but who's never really thought of you as an office and what it needs to do such a great job, and that Jeff Council member changed one thing because suddenly they had a better understanding of what you're up to, what would you want that one thing to be?
Wow. You're asking me to put
And I
myself
understand that
in
you're
a
talking
council
about
member's
upstairs.
shoes. Yeah. And honestly, and this is not because they're going to be listening to this or something. I am very appreciative, having worked in other evaluation functions. I'm appreciative of their appreciation of the IEO work, their recognition of the IEO work through approving a budget, work program, and their engagement. You know, I mean, telling us like, could you take a look at this issue? We really want this to inform the next discussion. That shows interest in evaluation and use, right? And what further do you want? You want your board members to actually use your work.
So basically, shout out to the Jeff Council, right?
Yeah, and it's true. It's like every council meeting, they listen to our evaluations. They appreciate the effort we're taking on communicating it succinctly, on our new formats in communication, which I think is a big area. Okay, I think, gone are the days where you can produce an evaluation report and say, hey guys, just read it. No way. You got to.
I did look at your new website and I did love it. I thought it was pretty great.
So that's one. So I don't think there's a major thing I would like them to change, but I would like to see
keeping on.
I would like to see continued investment in this culture that they've built, right? Because, council members change. They change. There's a rotation, just like there's rotation in government. And so they view it really, they continue to view it as important for their strategic decision making, and not just here's the accountability part, right?
That's so nice.
Yeah, I think that's because I think ultimately, I think the IEO has provided a lot of credibility also to the Jeff. And that's what people have recognized, right? And that's what even the agencies and management recognize now. And that's why increasingly we are called to participate, right? Can you please participate in this convention? Can you participate in this program review? Because I have tried in my capacity to shift the culture from what you're doing wrong to what you can do differently and better. A glass half empty approach to a glass that can be filled and how it can be filled. And I think that tone and I think the way you communicate makes all the difference.
What a lovely interview, Geeta. Thank you so much for joining me. It was really, really nice to hear from you.